welcome back to my channel. So I am so excited because I was just having such a lovely afternoon. It's so gloomy and I'm weird. I love the gloom, the gray skies, and I was driving by the beach and it was just like so foggy, and of course I was playing Folklore, and so I was just like, oh my gosh, I really should go back and film my Taylor Swift discography video. So I want to take you guys through Taylor's entire discography, very brief overview, just because like it's hard for me to fathom the fact that so many people out in the world are still not like complete Swifties. Like part of me assumes that everyone is, but then I realized that like a lot of people don't even understand the basics of like her life and her career. So I thought that that would be really fun for any newbies, just to like give a brief overview, and then if you have any questions you can ask. But honestly, I feel like this is going to help me as well because I'm still trying to decide which era I want to start in. Maybe I'll just wait for Tortured Poets at this point. But anyway, so I just wanted to do a little brief overview. We have to go back to the beginning, which is basically before 2006. So Taylor's first album debut came out in 2006, and it was her self-titled album, and it was country. It was obviously what made me a Swiftie back when I was like 12 years old. I actually remember I was in my dad's car and we were in the parking lot of like a CVS, and he needed to run in to grab something. He left me the keys to listen to music, and so I crawled into the front seat, turned the car on enough to listen to the radio, and there were like 3 stations that I would listen to at the time, and nothing was on the first one, so I flipped it to the country radio station, and this new artist was being talked about, and it was this teenage girl named Taylor Swift, and they played the song Teardrops on My Guitar. And I just remember thinking, I can't believe she used Drew's name in the song. Like, I just thought that was so iconic and so cool. And I loved the attention to detail, and it really was like empowering as like someone who wanted to be a writer to think of like the way the specificity actually impacted the listening experience, if that makes sense, but like also the level of vulnerability. It was just so cool. I instantly wanted to go home and buy a guitar so I could cry on it because I am that dramatic, but it was also just super relatable. So basically her debut album was a culmination of songs that she'd been working on since she was like 13. I think the song A Place in This World she wrote when she was 13. She wrote other ones when she was like 14, 15. And then obviously the album was released when she was 16. So she only went to high school for her freshman and sophomore year, and then she did junior and senior year on the road while she was literally like touring and doing opening acts for different bands. And someone had said in an interview once that for every 10 songs that Taylor wrote for like her eventual debut album, there would probably be like 1 song that was good enough to make it onto the album. And then over time they watched that kind of switch, and then it was like out of every 10 songs that were written, 9 of them were like album ready, which is just kind of like showing her growth so early on as a songwriter. So anyway, that's basically how Taylor Swift kind of got herself established in the music industry. Obviously it was country. She went to Nashville, and that's where she really got her big break. I don't know how much I really want to touch on the whole like Scott Borchetta stuff. Let me know if you want to know about that. But what I also think is really interesting about her debut album is that she would often say that like she tries to be a really nice person, but if you break her heart or are mean to her, she's gonna write a song about you. And I honestly think that's kind of what started the whole narrative of like Taylor Swift just writes breakup songs about people and like you better watch out, and like it ended up getting a negative spin. But in the beginning, that's really what was like such a good marketing tool, because she was her own songwriter and she was so good with lyrics, and that's honestly what needed to set her apart, her songwriting and of course having her guitar with her. So that was like a huge thing in the beginning, her specificity, her lyricism, and obviously her stage presence, because if you see that curly hair and she whips it around, it was so cool and fun, and she had the sundresses and the cowboy boots, and it was definitely introducing country music to the young girl population. So debut got a decent bit of recognition, but it was like a slow progression. Like it started out decent and then it got a little bit better, and I think it wasn't until like pretty long after the album had been released that it like started growing rapidly, which I don't actually know why or how that happened, but it was really cool, and it just kind of showed that she was skyrocketing. And then there was an interview that she did, I think in like one of her trailers, where she said there's like 5 seconds a day where she allows herself to be like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening, and then the rest of the day she's trying to figure out how to keep the success happening. And I just think it's so important that people recognize from her start, from the very beginning, she was thinking about how to stay relevant, how to keep the success, how to keep growing, how to get better. And her brain was just so smart and mature for like such a young age, and she knew exactly what she wanted. And another thing I wanted to point out is that when she first moved to Nashville, how old was she? 13, 14, 12? She was really young, but she signed on to a development deal with, I think it was RCA. And basically that meant that she would like go write songs with them, but like they were gonna watch her growth for a year. She didn't get an actual album that she could start working on. She didn't get like a record deal. It was a development deal. So I think she did that from the time she was 14 to 15, and they didn't want to sign her. They wanted to do another year of like development. And so she said no, and she walked away from one of the biggest record labels in Nashville and wanted to go find someone who was going to give her a record deal immediately. She wanted to start putting music out. She had so much music. If you think about it, she was writing songs from like her whole childhood, 12, 13, 14, 15, and you know, she was ready to start making an album. And I think it's so good because I can't imagine what would have happened if she didn't switch and she didn't get her record label when she did, which meant she wouldn't have been able to record her album when she was 15, and it wouldn't have been able to be launched when she was 16. And so probably a lot of the songs that we got on debut maybe would have eventually have been cut. But anyway, she was a genius from the very beginning. And then after the success of debut started happening, she was already working on her second album, Fearless. And Fearless was her first headlining tour that she did. And she must have already been pretty well known, or at least getting into like the Hollywood world, because she was dating Joe Jonas. And there are songs on Fearless about Joe. And she was in the Hannah Montana movie. She wrote Crazier for the movie. I think she even wrote that song, You'll Always Find Your Way Back Home, which I didn't know for a long time, but that's really cool. So she was definitely like finding her footing in so many areas of the entertainment world already before she was even like 18 years old. I also think that's why Fearless was so unique and cool, because she had the experiences from like being in high school freshman and sophomore year, but then she also had the experiences of being in Hollywood and with celebrities and at award shows, and it was genuinely like the best of both worlds. It was such a unique mixture of like life experiences that she could write about from such a young age, and I think that was one of the reasons Fearless was so relatable and so iconic. Also, I feel like with Fearless, Taylor was definitely still on that like upward trajectory. Like Fearless was so good. It had everything you loved about debut, but just made better, which is what naturally people expect of you when you're like growing and putting out new music. And it's interesting to think about where Taylor was in her love life at this time, because with debut, a lot of the songs that she wrote, I remember her saying they weren't necessarily about like real life experiences, but she was just such an empathetic person. And I think a lot of writers can relate to that, where they see something or someone or a movie or like people sitting on a park bench and they start creating these stories in their head. And then all of a sudden this whole narrative is playing out before you and you just have to write it down. And there was a song on debut called Mary's Song, and she said that it was about her neighbors that were high school sweethearts and they like lived together and grew old, and it was just like so sweet and wholesome. And so she wrote about that, and just like so many songs were from kind of this like, if it wasn't a personal experience, it was something that she had like dreamed about or hoped about or thought about. And I think oftentimes in those early albums, people forget her level of creativity. It wasn't just writing autobiographical songs. Like she could write from other people's perspectives too. And I think that's something to keep in mind and remember, because obviously she goes back to that when we get to Folklore. There's also a line in, was it 15? Where she says, I swear I thought I would marry him someday, but I realized some bigger dreams of mine. Some of the themes on Fearless are really like uniquely positioned in that space of like small town, regular high school versus like I have big dreams and I want to move to a big city, and like there's this big huge world and life ahead of me, and recognizing that sometimes you have to let go of certain things to go after what you really want in life. And I find it fascinating, especially with everything about Joe that we have kind of come to learn. I don't know how any of us ever thought that Taylor was okay with a life of mundanity and like being out of the public eye. Like, I totally understand wanting a certain level of privacy, but I also feel like Taylor was meant to shine, and it's just like so deeply a part of her. I'm just really happy that she is seemingly living her best life right now. Diamond was made to shine. So eventually, after the success of Fearless, we move on to Speak Now. Speak Now is her third album. Overall, it was largely considered a success. However, it was also seen as more of the same. It was very similar to Fearless, and I think that is when Taylor started getting worried that she was going to be pigeonholed into a very specific niche, a very specific genre, a very specific type of writing about boys and love, and she definitely didn't want to be restricted in her creativity. But after Fearless, I think she started getting a lot of criticism, people speculating that she didn't actually write her own music, or like how much of the writing was actually hers when she was in, you know, the studio working with other writers. And so she kind of took it upon herself to write all of Speak Now entirely alone so that she could have all the writing credits, which she has later come to say that like in the past, she tried to do things that people said she couldn't do. So if people said, oh, you can't write, watch me write an entire album myself. She wanted to prove people wrong, and that was her motivating factor. I think she even said that people like underestimate how much she's like fueled by spite or something. I personally don't think fans ever questioned Taylor's songwriting. I think we always could tell that songs were like so personal and so uniquely hers, and this dream that she always had of having people in the audience singing her song lyrics back to her. Like, I don't know. It's just the whole idea of like the way the media is skeptical of like women's success is so annoying, because I just feel like men don't get picked apart in the same way that women do, especially women in the industry who are succeeding at doing their job well. It's like there's always people trying to be like, but you're not actually being that successful. So anyway, it makes a lot of sense after Speak Now. Like, basically, Speak Now was largely born out of spite because she wanted to prove that she could write her own album. However, she, I guess, did rely on a lot of the same writing tendencies that she had used previously in Fearless. And so while Speak Now was successful, the criticism was that it was more of the same. So that is why she knew that she needed to have more collaborators when it came to her next album. She needed to change up the sound a bit. It needed to be different. It had to be. She didn't want to be putting out a fourth album that was more of the same, which is why we get Red, which was largely deemed a mosaic of messy music, where it was like, is it pop, is it country, you know, there's heartbreak, and she kind of marketed it as like, when you're in your early 20s, you are a mess and you don't know what you want or who you are. And so that's why the album was kind of said to be all over the place. I personally thought it was one of Taylor's best albums, and I feel like if I ever wanted to really truly introduce someone to everything that Taylor is, Red would be the perfect way to do that, because it has those country elements, it has the storytelling, it has All Too Well, it has, you know, more of the pop stuff that she really started realizing that I need a radio hit, and so you get things like We Are Never Getting Back Together, 22. I also find it really interesting that with Speak Now, she went from like, I want to do all of this on my own to prove to other people that I can write an album, to then going to Red being like, I absolutely need to have collaborators on this album because I need to start integrating different sounds into my music, and this is very important to stay relevant. This is very important to reach a wider audience. This is very important if I want to get mainstream pop culture radio success. Like, I have to start pulling new people in. And so that's exactly what she did. And it's so funny looking back because you can kind of see these patterns of how everything turned out and why things happened the way they did. But of course, at the time, it wasn't as obvious. Scott Borchetta, Taylor's like record label guy, was very skeptical about what she wanted to do and actually restricted her from changing the sound too much from country. And he, I think, only let her put like 3 pop songs on the record because they wanted it to still be labeled country. And I don't remember when we got this information, but I feel like it really shows the tension that was building between Taylor and her record label, because there were so many creative disagreements of Taylor recognizing so smartly what she needs to do to change her sound and be relevant, and then her record label pushing back, being like, this is what works, this is what needs to be done because this is what's always been done. You don't make history by doing what's always been done. You have to do things differently, and that's what Taylor does, and that's what she did, but she always had to fight for it. And I think that's what's so cool, is that from the beginning, she had to fight for what she wanted in so many different aspects of her career. So ultimately, Red was deemed a heartbreak album. And even in interviews, she had mentioned that she was really sad during this time, and she would be like crying after certain interviews, and she was still dealing with a lot of that heartbreak. But I think this is also the time when people started really getting louder in the media, saying that all Taylor Swift writes about is heartbreak. All she writes about is boys. All she writes about is her relationships. And they were obviously taking a very sexist approach to her songwriting. I think someone even asked her, like, what are you gonna do when you finally get happy? Anyone who asks that does not listen to Taylor Swift's music. I feel like I saw a quote somewhere that had to do with like, good art doesn't need to come from pain, but it was at the Grammys where Red was nominated and it didn't win, and it was that night. There's so many things that kind of just like create history. But anyway, Red was incredibly successful. It was so good. I think Taylor's diehard fans just loved it inevitably, but it also brought in new fans from the radio hits, and it was a different and new enough sound that it was exciting, and it was just so good. But then Red didn't win a Grammy, and I just looked this up. It's so sad. It says in 2014, when she didn't win for Red, she told Pop Sugar she went home, cried, and ate In-N-Out Burger and reflected on her loss. Okay, wait, Taylor, I just have to know, what is your In-N-Out order? Because I feel like mine is epic, so you gotta get the chopped chilies. That's all I'm saying. Grilled onions and raw onions. Actually, I have to know what her In-N-Out order is. Hold on. What is Taylor Swift's In-N-Out order? You don't really need Taylor Swift's endorsement to pull into the In-N-Out drive-thru, but knowing that the Red singer orders classics like cheeseburgers, fries, and chocolate shakes comes in handy if you're not sure what to order. That doesn't really give me much information. It's been on my bucket list for over a decade to interview Taylor Swift, but like I'm also torn because I have so many like non-important questions that I want to ask her, like, is your favorite color still purple? And do you still smell like expensive wood? And what's your In-N-Out order? And coffee or tea? Do you like oat milk? What, like, I don't know. There's so many like non-important questions, but then there's also like very, very important questions that I just like have to know about what she reads and like her songwriting. And there's so much pressure. That could be so fun to come up with interview questions for her together. But basically, after Taylor didn't win the Grammy for Red, she sulked for a while and then absolutely knew the next album is going to be an entirely pop album, and it's going to be called 1989. And I think the clarity that came from her knowing that it needed to be completely pop was because people had said that Red was a bit too all over the place, and she knew she wasn't going to go all the way back to country because that was basically what the criticism was about Speak Now. And so the only other alternative logically was to go full pop. And she had such clarity when it came to this decision, and her record label literally said, this is the best album you've ever made, speaking about 1989, but can you just add 3 country songs to it? And she was like, no, thanks, but no. And it just goes to show how much people did not believe in her vision. But I feel like 1989 is probably the most cohesive album she's ever made, which also makes sense because she was trying her absolute hardest to make it extremely cohesive and wanting to avoid the criticism that she had with Red, but also the fact that she cut Slut from the album because it felt too LA and the album was basically New York. As much as that pains me to not have had Slut because it was so good and iconic and one of my favorite vault songs, it was the right decision. That song screams Los Angeles. Like, she's just so smart. She always makes the right decision. And anyway, so I'm also still really shocked by how dramatic the music industry makes a genre shift, and I think that's starting to slowly change, especially with like Beyonce releasing a country album, which is just like so cool, but also I feel like a few years ago that would have been the most unheard of thing. But I love it. I love artists challenging themselves to grow and evolve and like do new things that make it fun and exciting still, instead of just like feeling like they constantly have to do the exact same thing over and over and over again. I remember when Taylor wrote Teardrops on My Guitar for her debut album, it almost went to a different country artist and they rejected it because it sounded too pop. And I will say, I have always thought that Taylor's music borderlined pop music, even when she was in her like hardcore country era with the twang and stuff. It still felt very much like country pop. And that was largely one of the reasons why I loved it, but I also loved it because of the songwriting. And she said with 1989, that she believed that the fans who've supported her really supported her because she was making good music and because there were real raw lyrics and good songwriting. Ultimately, they would stick with her through a genre shift if the music was good. Obviously, we would. But the music was so good. It was epic. It was absolutely insane. And 1989 skyrocketed Taylor to an enormous amount of fame. She was doing so much publicity during this time. She was on like every commercial. She cut her hair short. She was living in New York. She was in her Girl Squad era. She was doing red carpets with the girls. She was posting Instagram pictures with the girls. And it just looked like she was one of the most popular girls in the world, and she was living her life having so much fun. This was also kind of like the time where she swore off dating. She was done with the heartbreak. She was basically living for her friends and like just kind of exploring herself in her 20s and not focusing on like intertwining her life with like a guy. She was just focused on herself and her friends and her life and her cats. Wait, did she only have one cat back then? When did she get Benjamin Button? I think that was on a music video shoot. I'm drinking chai. It's actually a flat white with chai, but they ran out of oat milk, so I had to get soy milk, and I forgot their soy milk is sweetened, and so it's a little too sweet. That would be another question I would ask Taylor. You still like chai? Do you like chai more than coffee? Do you like chai cookies but not chai tea? Why do I need to know these things? But I need to know these things. So the reason 1989 was so interesting was that not only did she distance herself from the country sound entirely and go fully into pop to make it more cohesive, but she also distanced herself from the very typical breakup, songwriting, heartbreak lyrics that we were so used to. And because that was a common criticism, if she was writing too much about heartbreak, you need to write about something else. She really turned away from the love songs, and she turned herself more into a shrouded mystery, which we learned about. She says the only way back to my dignity was to turn myself into like a shrouded mystery the way that I was when you were chasing me, or something like that. And so it really makes the entire album make more sense, because so much of 1989 is not as vulnerable when you really think about it. It's almost like she was living behind a facade. So like Blank Space is obviously the embodiment of who the media was, painting her out to be. And so she created this character of this serial dater who was psychotic and crazy. And like, it was almost like she was poking fun at herself, but like also being like a mirror and showing the world, like in the media, this is really what you're saying about me and look how ridiculous this is. And I think there's a fine line there, because sometimes I feel like people can poke fun at themselves to act like, oh, everyone's like laughing at me, I'll laugh with you, I'm in on the joke too, this is like, we're all a part of this, And like, sadly, I feel like it is a defense mechanism to not feel so isolated or like made fun of. I feel like with 1989, I mean, obviously Taylor did it so successfully, but part of me feels like it was maybe just like a slight veil being put up of like, I'll just let them see a persona and not as much of the real me. And I think that became even more clear once we received the vaults, because a lot of the vault songs really depicted more vulnerability from Taylor and her experiences with Harry and just like everything that was going on. Oh my God, you guys. I forgot to mention that when all of this was going on between Harry Styles and Taylor Swift, obviously she wrote Style, which there was an interview that Ryan Seacrest did with Taylor. This was also an iconic turning point in her career, because in Style, she says, I heard that you've been out and about with some other girls. And he says, what you've heard is true, but I can't stop thinking about you and I. And then she says, I've been there too a few times. Ryan Seacrest pointed this out and was like, that's very interesting, because it almost seems like in your previous songs, you were always like blaming the guy for doing things. And in this song, you're like, no, it's cool, I was there too. Like taking some responsibility for like the relationship not being fully perfect. It was definitely an interesting shift in her persona, where it's like, I'm growing up, I'm learning, I'm evolving, like I'm taking responsibility for complications in relationships between two people or whatever. I was in college, you guys, and I was in charge of the entertainment and tourism club on my campus. And so I would bring students to like live tapings of TV shows. And one of the things we were able to go to was Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. I hate to ruin this for anyone, but the LA version is not live. It's actually pre-recorded in November. And I went there, I think it had to have been 2015 going into 2016. So I didn't know this, but One Direction was at Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve performing, and it's where they performed their song Perfect. For the first time, nobody had heard the song, so they had to perform it twice because we were in the audience and no one knew the lyrics. So we listened to them perform it once and like had to basically try to learn the song, and then they performed it one more time so we could like sing along to the lyrics. And Harry Styles is literally a foot away from me singing, "If you like cameras flashing every time you go out, and if you're looking for someone to write your breakup songs about, then baby I'm perfect," or whatever. And I was like, he wrote this song about Taylor Swift. And I'm hearing it for the first time, and oh my god. And I was never ever a fangirl. My roommate literally said this. I enjoyed One Direction. I liked their music. I thought they were good. I never really thought much of it beyond that. When I saw Harry Styles in person in his skinny black jeans, and he was so tall and handsome as hell, and oh my god, I was like, I get it. I absolutely get it. You guys, I literally went back to my college dorm room. I binge watched every episode of The X Factor or whatever show he was on, fell in freaking love with him. Mind you, I have my boyfriend at this time, but it's Harry Styles. I was so obsessed with him. And my roommate is like, what has gotten into you? You're not usually like a fangirl, but you're like going crazy. And I'm like, you don't understand until you're in Harry Styles' presence. He looked into my eyeballs, you guys, and I wrote a song about Harry Styles. Could you believe it? Taylor and I both wrote songs about Harry Styles. Let's see if I still have it. This is absolutely the most embarrassing thing ever because obviously my song is terrible, but it's just funny to think about. I'm gonna look it up. My notes app. Okay, how do I find it? I found the song that I wrote about Harry Styles literally the night after filming Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. And obviously it's easy to tell that it wasn't live because literally on New Year's Day, Harry Styles was on a yacht with Kendall Jenner somewhere else. So there's no way he was in LA the night before performing. But I just feel so crazy to know that like at the end of 2015, in the midst of everything that had been going on. Well, I mean, I guess 1989 had been out for like a year at that point. You guys, November 21st, 2015, 9:42 p.m. You've got green eyes that look blue and songs I hardly knew, but I could tell there was something about you. You've got that adorable smirk and all you do is flirt, but can't you see that I'm willing to get hurt? What is up with all these girls willing to literally sacrifice themselves for Harry Styles? I swear he has like a spell that he puts on people. Baby, you can take my heart and do whatever you want. I know that we just met, but you've got something I trust. And all these other girls are probably just like me. They'll be whatever you need. So how do I compete? I know I'm not the best out there, but when your hands are in your hair, I think maybe I'm the one for you. Okay, this is so embarrassing. I cannot believe I'm putting this on the internet. So seeing Harry was awesome. Listening to him sing a song about Taylor Swift was even better. He had grown his hair long at this point, which obviously Taylor references in her vault tracks for 1989. Yeah, clearly Harry just has something going for him. But you know, I was so trying to be cool at the time that there was this girl that was obsessed with Harry Styles, and I was able to get like ahead of her in line, and so I was closer to the stage than she was, and she was so sad, and I was like, I'll take one for the team. I don't care about being front row and center for One Direction. Zayn was already like out of the band at this point, so I grabbed this girl's hand. She has like big long poofy red hair, and I pull her to the front and I push her in front of me, and I go like, I mean, I'm not like aggressive about it, but like obviously she was happy because she wanted to be in the front row, but she brought her friend with her. And then I'm sardine smushed right behind her, and her hair is like all up in my space, so I can't even move her, or else I'm pulling her hair. And then I see One Direction walk out, and I'm like, instant regret. Oh my god, go back behind me. I need to be closer to Harry Styles. So back to Taylor's 1989 era. She was clearly heartbroken over Harry and everything that had gone on. Makes complete sense. Totally get it, Taylor. I've been there too. But she was really embracing her Girl Squad era. She was really embracing friendships, and she was trying to be a bit more mysterious with her songwriting, and she was really embracing that like, I'm a girl in a big city persona. Also, she had so many radio hits. Every single song on 1989 could basically be a radio single, and obviously that was done intentionally. I think she really, really wanted this album to reach the masses. And it's so funny because I feel like every single person I talk to that's not like a hardcore Swiftie who knows all of the songs on every album, they're always like, Shake It Off is her best song. My dad says that. I'm sorry. that was a song for the people that weren't Swifties. Is that bad to say? I feel like Shake It Off. I mean, Taylor's explained like her gel pen songs and then her quail pen songs and then what's the other pen? Belt? I don't remember. But it's clearly a gel pen song and it's amazing for what it is, but it's more surface level and we know that Taylor has more depth. So part of me feels like reaching the masses is like people who don't want to go as deep, if that makes sense. Anyway, 1989 catapulted her to a new amount of fame. She was literally everywhere. She was so famous, so iconic. And then the Kanye stuff happened. And it's actually really sad to listen to the unedited phone call because it's just so relatable to be the type of person that wants to be okay with someone who has wronged you and you've tried to just put it past you and like have forgiveness, and you don't want to have like bad blood with someone. You want to just be good, you know? And she was trying so hard to be nice in that phone call, but it was just so sad because it's like, she don't want to deal with this crap, you know? Anyway, she says in the phone call with Kanye that she felt like she was very, very close to overexposure and she was very aware of herself being everywhere, and she kind of felt like she was going to need to pull back a little bit because she felt like it was getting to the point where people were going to kind of nitpick. If there was one tiny misstep she made, one tiny thing she did wrong, it was going to explode because that was like where she was at with the whole public perception. It's like when you're sick of someone, when there's so much of you, I mean, I was never sick of her, but when you're everywhere and there's so much of you, it's easy to feel like once you've reached a certain level of like fame, it's inevitable that people are going to want to start tearing you down. It's just like a weird psychological thing. So she was very aware of that. And I feel like that's why everything that happened with the Kanye phone call was even worse, because obviously Kim released the manipulated version and everyone was calling her a snake and a fake. And so it was like, it just compounded the timing and everything. It was like when you're already pushing the boundaries of public acceptance and then something like that happened, it was very easy to get on like the Taylor Swift hate train, which makes me so sad because I remember at the time I was like, oh yeah, that phone call doesn't look that good. It doesn't sound that good, but I just kind of assumed she was trying to be nice on the phone call, and then she heard the song and she just got pissed and she was mad that she was nice to him when she just realized, why am I being nice to this guy? Like, he's not a good person and he is just constantly manipulating me. And so I didn't think that much of it. I was just like, yeah, that sounds bad. It sucks that it was like illegally recorded, but I didn't think too much of it. And I feel really, really bad because looking back now, I feel like I have so much more empathy for celebrities that go through massive like waves of hate like that. Like I remember when there was this whole Selena Gomez, Hailey Bieber feud that was going on TikTok, and it got really, really bad. And everyone was like, I'm team Selena, I'm team Selena. Like Hailey had lost like 1 million followers, which I know seems so like shallow and like not a big deal, but I feel like people don't understand that like when being a celebrity is like part of your livelihood and you're losing that much support and so many people are basically telling you that they hate you and calling you names and misrepresenting the truth, it can be so toxic. And I worry so deeply about people's mental health. And I remember saying like, everyone loves Selena, of course we love Selena, but like why are we hating other women? I just don't get it. It like bothers me so much, and everyone's just like not taking it that seriously. But I think I just take mental health so seriously, and especially with social media, I can see how toxic it can get. And so of course when Taylor says like everyone, like the number one trending thing worldwide was like the Taylor Swift is over party. Like that's so sad. So she thought her entire career was over. She thought nobody wanted to hear from her anymore. She thought nobody wanted to see her anymore. And so after 1989, she goes from being everywhere to being nowhere. She literally goes into hiding, goes into isolation. Everything's kind of like quiet on her part for like over a year. There was actually one performance that she had to do, I think, and it was after, I think it was like, it must have been 2017, and it was AT&T, it was right before the Super Bowl, and it was so interesting because she looked like 1989 Taylor mixed with Reputation Taylor, but Reputation didn't exist yet, and it's actually like really, it's so emotional to watch her performance because she did a few songs in Houston, Texas, but I just knowing like what she was feeling at the time, it makes me so sad because she was like desperate for that connection with her fans and like really needed to like know that she could still perform and she could still write music and she could still be loved by her fans and that we would still support her. And I feel like at that time she didn't know that, and she didn't know what was gonna happen in the future. And it's crazy to think because like she went from that to like now doing the Eras tour where like she's the most loved person in the world. So it's hard to see sad Taylor. I had a Spotify playlist called Sad Taylor and I deleted it because it made me too sad. Anyway, if you want me to react to that concert, let me know. I feel like I could cry. It would be so sad. But it was so insightful and interesting because there were just different things that she has said in that concert that kind of lead you to believe that she was really needing her fans. And it was sad that she was in isolation. And I would bet money that she did that concert because of like a contractual obligation. I feel like she probably wouldn't have done it because she seemed really fragile. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. After the 1989 era was coming to an end, Taylor dyes her hair bleach blonde, and there was an Instagram picture called Bleachella because she wore her bleached blonde hair to Coachella. It was basically what people started speculating as like the genre shift because everyone knows that Taylor changes her look with every album that she does. And so we were expecting this like 90s grunge to maybe be the next album after 1989, because if Taylor had learned anything, it was that she needed to constantly keep changing her look, her sound, everything, her image. There was also an interview, I forget what it was called, but it was like when they ask you those like questions on YouTube, and in that interview someone asked like what she had learned or something, and she says that karma is real, and that was one Easter egg that people thought was hinting at the fact that her next album might be called Karma. It's also important to know that like clockwork, Taylor released an album every 2 years. So she released her first one in 2006, her second one in 2008, Speak Now was 2010, Red was 2012, 1989 was 2014, and everyone expected that Taylor's next album was going to be released in 2016. And it's also really important to realize that if all of 1989 was about her relationship with Harry Styles, that means the entire Girl Squad era, the entire relationship that she had with Adam, or Calvin Harris, was never really put on an album. And so it's just really hard to believe that she turned in 1989 and was not writing music for 2 years. So a lot of people speculated that she may have had an album that was set to come out in 2016. And when the whole Kanye stuff happened and she got canceled, she had to scrap the album because it seemed like not the right time for her to be releasing more music because it seemed like nobody wanted to hear from her. And she'd also said though that she felt like she was so close to overexposure that she needed to pull back. She wasn't sure if she was gonna record more music or just take a break or whatever. I don't know if that's true or if she was just saying that because she wanted to see the public perception. Everyone who's followed this strongly believes that Taylor had an album called Karma that was supposed to come out in 2016 that got canceled because of Kanye, and it's further validated because when she released the single Look What You Made Me Do, that music video there's so many Easter eggs in it, and she's swinging in a cage where she's wearing orange, and it's like the songbird was caged. So everyone has attributed the color orange with Karma. And then on the airplane, she had like crossed out something like, oh no, it was TS6, but the plane had been landed because she couldn't fly. I don't know. Honestly, if you want me to watch that music video and do a better Easter egg deep dive, let me know because that would be so interesting. I haven't seen it in so long, but there were just so many Easter eggs that pointed to the fact that there was an album called Karma that was scrapped. And even if that wasn't the exact name, like Karma represents the album that was scrapped. And Taylor knows this because when she was doing the Midnight Mayhem, like announcing the track list for Midnights, when she announced Karma, she giggled and she said, I was excited for this one. And she said, Karma. She knows that we know that there was another album and we need it. So I actually have a theory that Karma might be the double side of Reputation because it was supposed to come out when Reputation came out. And I actually think that the coffee cup that we see in the Karma music video, where it says like the blue thumb is in August for when 1989 re-recording was announced, and then the black thumb was on the number 2, and people always thought that that was Reputation that was supposed to be coming out. I theorized that the Roman numeral 2 looks like an 11, and the time on the coffee cup clock is actually 11 o'clock because it's not quite midnight. So I was like, maybe Reputation, the black nail, is gonna come out on 11/11 because the 2 looks like an 11. I mean, she's been doing this a lot. I don't know. So my theory is that 11/11 is double 11s and Reputation might be a double album. I don't think it could be marketed as a double album. I think it would be marketed as like Reputation, and then maybe all the vault songs were the album that was supposed to be Karma. I'm not sure, but the Man music video has Karma written in orange twice on the wall. Why would it be there? You know what I mean? Like, if it wasn't one of the albums, why does it say please return to Taylor Swift? So peculiar. But I still think 11/11 is Veterans Day, and it's probably going to be something that was also the day that she was on, I think it was Jimmy Fallon, where she said, can I like plan Easter eggs 3 years in advance? Can I, even plan things that far ahead? That was November 11th of 2021. So 3 years from that would be 2024. And what do we know that she could have been planning 3 years ago? It wouldn't have been anything to do with her Joe breakup because she wasn't certain about that. It really couldn't have been anything, I don't think, with Midnights or with Tortured Poets at all because they didn't exist yet. The only thing she would have been able to plan properly 3 years in advance were the re-recordings. And so I think that was an Easter egg for 3 years in advance from that date. That's my theory. Let me know what you think. Also, I just want to throw this tidbit in there because I don't want to forget it. When she was doing an interview with, it was one of those virtual interviews, I forget who it was with, Jimmy Kimmel. And he mentioned something about not being able to do like a cartwheel, or Taylor says that she can't do a cartwheel and she wants to be able to do that at a party. I looked up National Cartwheel Day, April 29th. That was an Easter egg. Do you really want to know where I was April 29th? Do I really need to tell you how he brought me back to life? So anyway, the ending of the 1989 era was very tragic and sad because Taylor basically ran away with Joe Alwyn. I mean, there was this whole Met Gala drama. We got Getaway Car, but that came later. So she is in London with Joe and basically wrote Reputation, recorded it, came back a completely different person. And Rep was iconic. I went to the Rep tour. It's probably one of my favorite albums. I love it so much, but I personally think that like Houston, Texas performance that she did in between the transition between 1989 and Reputation, her nails were black. I feel like that gives so much insight to like what Reputation was, because Reputation, the way that it just like punches you, it's so in your face. It's so strong. It's so powerful. It's so just like, I know what I want and who I am and this is it and I don't give a crap what you say or what you think. Like, it had to be that way. She had to basically say, I don't care what my reputation is. I don't care what you think of me because of these things. And I think deep down we all know that that's not true, but the album itself feels so confident and so secure and so strong and powerful. And I think the persona that she was trying to put forward with Reputation was that, like, she's rising from the ashes stronger than ever. You tried to kill her, too bad. She's back from the dead. And it worked so well for what she needed to do at that time. But I felt like we got tiny glimpses of that vulnerability. Like in Dress, when she says, flashback, when you met me, your buzz cut and my hair bleached. Even in my worst times, you could see the best in me. Flashback to my mistakes, my rebounds, my earthquakes. Even in my worst lies, you saw the truth in me. And I woke up just in time. Now I wake up by your side. My one and only, my lifeline. I woke up just in time. And I felt like that was so vulnerable, because on Reputation, you get songs where it's like, I did something bad, so why does it feel so good? Most fun I ever had. Like, kind of saying, like, I am so over people criticizing what I'm doing, saying that it's bad, saying this or that. Like, I don't care. And I actually love it. I feel like with certain parts of the album, we get a little glimpse into like, maybe I wasn't making the best decisions, or maybe I wasn't being my best self, or maybe I wasn't actually being myself, and I wasn't acting the way that I want to be. It was very subtle. It was like specific, but not specific at the same time. Like, I personally think that we would not have been able to handle a song like High Infidelity on Reputation. There's no way she would have put that song on Reputation because it's too vulnerable. And what I've noticed is that you have to have so much trust in the people that you're giving your like vulnerability to not break it. And I think that that's so cool that she trusts her fans, but I also think she has to protect her peace. And when it came to like Reputation, she was already so fragile at the time, and she was so hesitant to even know if people wanted her to come back. And I think it's really, really sad too, because so many people in the industry, in the media, were like, Reputation's gonna be a flop, this is gonna be the worst album, this is gonna be the worst comeback ever. It was so negative. I didn't realize how negative it was. Obviously she proved them all wrong, because she's Taylor freaking Swift. But I just forget like how hard that must have been to go from like the success of 1989 to then being canceled, to then going into hiding, to then coming back with an album that everyone's telling you is gonna suck. And I think that's why she really felt so connected to the fans, because they were the ones that were like, no, these people are wrong. Your music is epic. Your music is so good. Your music saves us. Like, we need you and your music just as much as you need us. And it's so true. I think Reputation was such a good album for so many people, because when someone says, oh, I'm in my Rep era, like, what does that mean? That means you're not caring about what other people are saying. You're not caring about this persona. I think so often in life we try to be a certain way and we try to present ourselves in a certain way, and it takes time and learning and growing to realize that, like, I don't want to keep putting this facade up. Like, I want to actually be myself. Like, I actually don't care what you think about me. And that's powerful and that's freeing and that's, great. And so I think for so many people, Reputation represented that. And it came at such a good time for me because I was going through this weird transitional period where like I didn't know who I was and I was trying to figure out who I wasn't. And it was so good. My boyfriend actually got me the ticket to Reputation for Christmas. And so we went in 2018. Iconic. But basically with Reputation, Taylor did not have a choice but to come back acting like she genuinely did not care. She needed to come back as herself, but a version of herself that was not reliant on people's opinions, if that makes sense. And I think her relationship with Joe was a really good, not parallel to that, but it was really helpful in the way that like she was able to juxtapose this public life with a very personal life. And when her public life persona was not doing well, it didn't matter because my life when the cameras aren't around is so good. It's so golden. It's so sacred. And it just felt like something she really needed to protect because it was there for her when she needed it. But again, yeah, like I was saying, I don't personally think that a deeper level of like transparency or vulnerability would have been healthy for Reputation because of everything that was going on at the time and how fragile and vulnerable I feel like we now know she was. Again, not even knowing if the fans were gonna like want to see her shows, which is crazy. So anyway, once Reputation was a massive success and Taylor got her confidence back, this was also a very transitional period in her career because this was the last album that she needed to make for her original record label. And that is also kind of when we entered this time of her wanting to own her own music, her not being able to buy her albums outright. I think there was this weird deal offered by Scott Borchetta where he said, you can own one album back for every new album you make me. And it's like, shut up. No, this is so stupid. This is her work. And it makes me so mad. But I feel like there were, you know, obviously creative disagreements that were happening with the record label for quite some time. And then there was obviously her not being able to own her masters. But I just got really confused by this. If anyone wants to like let me know in more detail down below, that would be great. I don't understand why she couldn't buy back her masters. It makes no sense to me because what I personally thought was that Scott Borchetta was going to sell Big Machine Records and it would basically completely devalue his record label if he sold his record label without Taylor's masters. But why would that matter? I mean, Taylor would have given you any dollar amount for those masters. I don't understand why it would matter that his record label was devalued if he was planning on selling it anyway. Maybe he was just mad that she was like wanting to leave, but like she would have stayed if you would have given her her masters. So the whole thing's actually a little confusing to me. This is actually another interesting question that I would definitely ask Taylor if I got the chance to interview her. I am very fascinated by the idea people often say everything happens for a reason. And I used to say that when I was little. And then it actually started really irritating me because I feel like when people say everything happens for a reason, they're basically kind of dismissing any hard work the individual has put into making something happen. Like taking a bad situation and making it better. It's like you did that. It's not that everything happens for a reason. I don't know. Okay, that's my 2 cents. But what I would ask Taylor is, do you think everything happens for a reason? Or do you think that things just happen and it's up to us to make sense of it all? And part of the making sense of it is by turning a bad situation into something not bad. You know what I mean? All of that to say is that with the Eras tour, I don't know if we would have had the Eras tour the way we had it if it wasn't for her re-recordings and her kind of bringing all this new life and new attention to her older music. And obviously we wouldn't have had like at least 2 albums if it wasn't for the pandemic, which is like another really bad situation. But like, I think it ultimately, okay, I'm skipping ahead. I think it ultimately helped Taylor, but I will get to that when we get to Folklore. So she eventually left her record label after Reputation, which was a very exciting time. And then she was just kind of like a free bird and she could kind of make her own deal and do what she wanted. And that's when we get Lover, because basically after the success of Reputation, things were good. And I think that is what ultimately gave Taylor the ability to kind of go back to her roots, which is colorful and love and hearts. And it's so interesting because I was recently listening to Reputation and Lover, and Reputation to me, while it's one of, if not my favorite album, it doesn't like hurt me. You know what I mean? Whereas like I listen to some songs on Lover and I'm like, ow, like, oh my God, Cornelia Street. I could cry just thinking about Cornelia Street. Like that song was my favorite song, but I always am just like, it's so raw and vulnerable and fragile. And I just feel like with Lover, it's so interesting because she goes from being like completely black lipstick, Reputation to like, I'm going back to the glitter, I'm going back to sparkly, I'm going back to what I love, and I'm like stepping into myself again. But like, she's different. She is completely changed based on everything that's happened to her in her whole life, and like especially everything that happened to her from 1989 to Reputation. Like, Lover was like a return to herself, but it was almost like she was trying to make sure the shoes fit again. And don't get me wrong, I love Lover, and I think it did not get enough credit and attention, and some people were calling it a flop, which is so crazy to me that Taylor Swift can have like songs that go number 2 and that's considered a flop. Like, the standards that she has for herself are so high, but obviously the Eras tour has like redeemed Lover in so many people's eyes, which I love. I feel like with Lover and her relationship with Joe at the time, it's interesting because you get songs like Paper Rings and Cornelia Street and London Boy, but then you also have songs like Daylight and The Archer and Death by a Thousand Cuts, and I just feel like her relationship, and Cruel Summer, oh my gosh, it was like she was stepping into this like confidence and like this very secure relationship. And I don't know if this was intentional or just like how it happened, but I think because she met Joe when she was almost at her lowest point in her entire life, or like around that time is when they started their relationship, he is like someone that she absolutely clung to, almost as like, not a safety net, but like a life raft, you know what I mean? Like, in the midst of everything going on with her Reputation, Joe is who she clung to and who she was able to like get through the storm with. And so with Lover, I don't know if it was like an intentional thing where she wanted to put forth this like front where it's like, we're not really talking about our relationship because we don't want the media to speculate about it, because this is something we're protecting and we're so solid and so secure and so confident. And everyone like accepted that. For the longest time, it was like nothing could be said about Joe and Taylor because they were considered like complete end game. They are the definition of love. And I don't know if that was like almost like a defense mechanism so people wouldn't ask questions, and I don't know if she was trying to make it seem more perfect and more secure than it actually was. But when I actually listened to the songs on Lover, I'm like, this is so fragile. This is so unsettling, because I just felt like so many of the songs were like, are they okay? Like, you're gonna marry him with paper rings, but also just like, I don't know. It's really hard to explain. If you at all understand what I'm saying, please let me know. And if maybe this means I need to start my breakdown with Lover, because I feel like Lover is an album that I need to fathom more. I hope what I'm saying is making sense, but I have a feeling that it's not. So I'm just gonna move on. I just feel like Lover was Taylor trying to return to her genuine true self and like shed this persona that she put on to protect herself. But at the same time, I do feel like there was a tiny bit of not confidence that was lacking, but she feels more secure in herself now. And I can't put my finger on it, but if you know what I mean, let me know. Anyway, I have a theory, because a lot of people have criticized the single Me. Oh, and that's another thing I should touch on. I think although Taylor had left her old record label, I think she was still kind of focusing on what the industry had told her and taught her about what an album is and what an album rollout is. And so she picks the song Me to be the first single, which so many people have kind of like criticized or said that they didn't like that song. I have a personal theory that if you approach every Taylor Swift album with the fact that there are no skips, you will understand the genius of every single song, and you'll also understand the timing and the place for every song to like fully have its moment. But that's a story for a different day. I think that Taylor was still very much focused on doing things the way that she thought had to be done, even if that was like a subconscious messaging from her old label. You know, having certain singles being rolled out and like just doing a very strategically planned rollout the way that they did it. I think there was a lot of pressure, being especially with a new record label, to make Lover an extremely successful record. And I was just thinking about this the other day. The entire concept of the Lover house was only created because of Lover. I think so many people don't give that album the credit that it deserves for where it has brought us in like the Swift universe. So that is like a little defense I have of the album. I also think that someone had said in an interview with Taylor that the title Lover was very polarizing, and a lot of people didn't like it because it's like when you call someone your lover, it can be kind of cringy. It's like when people say like, oh, I'm making love instead of like having sex or something. And I kind of agree with the cringe, but I also love the fact that it has changed for me because of Taylor. But when someone asked Taylor that, she said that like everything she does is polarizing, so like she's just gonna do what she loves, and like she's just, you know, going with what she wants to name things. I think that's interesting in two ways. First of all, I love the confidence and I love the clarity, and I love, you know what you want and you're gonna do it. And I think you absolutely have to have that as a creative person, because it's so easy to follow what you think is popular or what other people are doing, and you have to be able to be polarizing and to be yourself in order to be successful, in my opinion. But also, number two, does that not provide so much more insight about who Taylor Swift is as like a lover? And that's so weird to say, but like I just feel like all she ever wanted was to like get married and like have a family and have that love story that she's been writing about since she was like 14 or like even younger. Like, it's crazy going back and watching some of her old interviews when she was like first trying to make it, because I think it's easy to forget when you see how successful she's become that like true love is all she ever wanted. I also just want to say I love her and Travis. They are so perfect. But anyway, yeah, I was recently in a Starbucks working and the song Me came on and I was like, oh my god, I know this song, and I was like singing to it and I was like, yes, like this makes sense. Again, back to my theory, there are no skips, you just have to know the right place and the right time. Also, Lover gave us Cornelia Street, and I think that will forever be my favorite song, although there are about like 10 songs that I would classify as my favorite song, just for different times. It's a little bit hard to listen to that song now because I'm just curious if Taylor will ever walk Cornelia Street again. I mean, did she lose him or did he lose her? You know? But anyway, what I was gonna say is that many of the songs on Lover are about like fights or misunderstandings or like fears of losing someone, and it feels a little bit unsettling. And I think maybe that's why the album as a whole is so interesting to me, because it's like it's presenting this message of like, you know, I'm with my lover. With every guitar string scar on my hand, I take this magnetic force of a man to be my lover. But at the same time, she's also like scared about losing him. And I don't know, very interesting. I'm rambling at this point. I definitely feel like we got a bit more of those raw emotions on Lover, and she was like opening herself up again and being more vulnerable than maybe on Reputation. And I think it's really cool that she was able to do that. And I think Taylor has to trust her fans enough to release music that is that vulnerable. And I totally understand why she would release things in a song but like not want to talk about them in an interview. It makes so much sense. As someone who has wanted to write a book for years, and I've like toyed between a self-help book or a fictional novel, there is just something about hiding behind characters that you can really say what you want to say, but like don't blame the author for what the character said, you know what I mean? Oh, I wrote here that I felt like Lover as an album was an extension of Delicate and New Year's Day from Reputation, which is a very good way of summarizing what I just tried to say forever. So anyway, we're on to Folklore. So after Lover, Taylor was basically, there was a Loverfest and then she was about to go on tour. I think she was supposed to go on tour in April of 2020, and everything of course shut down in March. So that got canceled. But if we know anything about Taylor, we know that she absolutely needs the connection from her fans. Like that is what gives her life and gives her so much confidence. It's just really hard to explain, but like I think she needs that connection like from the stage with her fans. And so having that taken away from her, like she did the whole Rep tour, but Rep was so hard for so many other reasons. Like I think for so long she was hesitant to even go back on tour. She wasn't sure if people would show up, and then they did, and then she was getting more comfortable, and it was just kind of like a, okay, I can do this again. I can still have my music career. I can still go on tour. I can still connect with the fans. Like my career is not taken from me. This isn't gone forever. And so then she does Lover, and it's like she's about to step into this new era of like her new self, her new confidence, her new record label. Like I remember in the Miss Americana documentary, she even said, I feel like Lover is my last chance to really kind of reach for the stars and get that level of success that I want. And then after that, she was going to be like one of those washed up pop stars who entered their 30s. And it's crazy and sad to think about, but I think because all of her tour dates got literally canceled because of the pandemic, she was forced to like all of a sudden not see into the future. She had no idea when things were going to open up again. And in Miss Americana, she had said like her life is planned out 3 years ahead of her. Like she cannot not plan things out that far in advance. And then all of a sudden, for the first time, she was able to kind of scrap any sort of plan or idea about an album or an album rollout. I think Folklore was this unique unique mixture of being so sad that her tour for Lover was taken away from her and that connection with fans was taken away from her, and then also kind of just the context of the whole world and everything was just so crazy, you know, concerns about people getting sick and people dying, and also just like wanting an escape and wanting to kind of go away from whatever this world was and to go into this other land. And then we get Folklore, which is a mixture of Taylor's incredible songwriting skills, but also it showed people, and I think it showed Taylor personally, that she did not have to strictly and forever write autobiographical songs, and she could write stories. She could tell love triangles, and she could tell different messages through different songs that aren't strictly about her life, and the fans would still love them and receive them and want them and care about them. And I think in any other world, she would have overthought that, thought too much about it, not obviously put an album out within a few months, but because of the pandemic, because all the rules went out the window, she made something and she was like, I think the world needs to hear this now. I think my fans need this now. And it was so perfect because everyone was so sad and it was such a weird time in lockdown. And then Taylor gives us an album and we're like, what? It was true healing, which makes so much sense. This is like one of the reasons why I loved the title of this channel, because her music was so healing and it was given to us in a time when we desperately needed connection and healing and something to be happy about and something that was just, you know, a distraction from the gruesome news all the time. The One is probably one of the most iconic album openers. I loved it. I'm doing good. I'm on some new shit. Like, I loved Folklore so much. And then, of course, Taylor has said, like, the rules just kind of went out the window. Oh, and there was one other thing I want to touch on. I know this video is getting so long, but I told you I was going to do a quick, like, recap of her albums, and this has been so long. But I think there was a very interesting thing that happened when you are an artist and you start putting music out into the industry, and then you start growing and evolving and learning, and you learn the ropes, and then you have to like continue to do what you're supposed to do, and you work within the, almost like you're confined to a certain way of doing things. And it's really interesting because when you think about like a debut album, you're young, you're excited, you're just kind of like throwing things together and like hoping that they work. I feel like when you are first starting out as an artist, you're just so excited to create something, and it's not something that you're even able to overthink because you don't know what to overthink, you know what I mean? Like, you're just creating something and putting it out. And then I think the industry really kind of like molds and shapes you, and even if you have to like fight back in certain areas, like it's really hard to constantly feel like you're pushing back on things. And then with the pandemic, I feel like Taylor with Folklore was able to almost return to that youthful way of creating an album where it was like, she said that she was with one photographer and she went into this field and she did this photo shoot, and it was like, I remember being in high school and doing photo shoots in a field, and it just kind of brings you back to like, get rid of Hollywood, get rid of the glitz and glam, get rid of all of this production and all these expectations, and like go back to the root of like what music is and what an album is and like what you're actually trying to create and give to people. And I think Folklore was like one of the best examples of that. So it was incredible. She put it out and it was iconic, and then she just kept writing and they weren't done, and they kept creating stories from this mythical world that they created. But I will say, I think Folklore and Evermore have a bit more truth than even Taylor would admit, or maybe she would admit it, I don't know. But I feel like, at least with me, I can create stories and I can create characters and I can write up these like scenarios, and then I go back and I read them and I'm like, if I read between the lines, I'm learning a lot about myself. And I think with some of her songs, where August is the perspective of the other woman, we have Illicit Affairs, I feel like there were quite a few songs, and let me know, I thought about doing an entire video going through songs about like cheating, but I feel like there was kind of slowly a way of planting this empathy in our minds for like the other woman. I think some of that may have stemmed from like Taylor changed the lyrics in Better Than Revenge because it's like, you're not blaming the other woman for taking your man. Like, that's not something that we do. I don't know. I just feel like all of that kind of relates to High Infidelity, and it makes a lot more sense with that song, but I digress. So we then get Evermore, and Evermore, Champagne Problems is one of my favorite songs. It's so good. I don't feel like there's a lot more to say about like Evermore as an album in Taylor's discography. Like, it was basically an extension of Folklore and an extension of the pandemic writing. Actually, one thing I will say is that with Folklore, the pre-sale vinyls and albums and stuff were counted in the first week of sales, and so that's why Folklore did so well. And then with Evermore, they changed that, and so the pre-sales were not counted in the first week sales, if that makes sense. sense. And although it still like went to #1 and did so good, it didn't do as well as Folklore for that reason. And I think that is why we will never get another surprise release album drop without any sort of advance notice, because those pre-sale numbers are so important for first week sales, and they did not count them for Evermore. They changed the rule after Folklore because I don't know if anyone had ever done what Taylor had done. So that's an interesting tidbit to note. So then of course after Evermore we get Midnights, and Midnights is so very, very exciting for so many reasons. But I feel like originally people were very confused by the album because it was supposed to be different midnights in Taylor's life. But the more we listen to it and the more we come to understand it, I think a lot of the songs were kind of like a breaking down of her relationship with Joe, and it makes more sense when we get You're Losing Me, and then Jack Antonoff writes on Instagram that was actually written in 2021, and they stayed together for like another, how much longer? Another year and a half. And then even like Labyrinth, Sweet Nothing, Bejeweled, there are so many songs on Midnights that we didn't fully understand at first. Or even Glitch. Like Glitch kind of makes me think they were like, Taylor and Joe were never supposed to work. They were never supposed to be together. They were kind of incompatible, but then there was a glitch, and so they, for 6 years, they had like this love blackout, but like kind of like that was never how it was supposed to be. Obviously I love Midnights. I am still curious who you guys think Midnight Rain is about, because like part of me thought it could be about Joe, part of me thought it could be about Tom Hiddleston. I don't think it's about Taylor Lautner, because I don't think she would have been writing about Taylor Lautner in the terms of like marriage and stuff. I also think Midnight is so interesting because like with Lavender Haze, you can read it two ways. Like you can read it as like, I just want to stay in this lavender haze because like the outside of our love bubble is messy and chaotic and stressful, but it's also like, I don't know, like in You're Losing Me, she says, how could you not tell my face was gray, but you couldn't tell that I was sick. But then with Lavender Haze, she's like, you don't really read into my melancholia. So it could be like, it's a good thing, you just don't really care about that type of thing, but it's also like, why don't you care about that type of thing, you know? I don't know, I'm explaining this so bad. Ultimately with Midnight, I feel, oh, like Would've, Could've, Should've is such a good song. Oh my gosh. And Karma. Obviously Midnights was iconic. Obviously the rollout of Midnights was so good with her TikTok mayhem and announcing the albums one at a time with like the little ball thing. It was definitely like a time. I miss that time when Taylor was just like posting on TikTok. I mean, now obviously she's busier, but she did say, I think it was with Jimmy Fallon, when he asked like how she was feeling after Midnights, she said that she is feeling very fragile after presenting this album. And maybe she thought that we were smarter than we were and we would like catch on to like the stuff with her and Joe. But I remember listening to certain songs and being like, who on earth is this about? Because it can't be about Joe, because like obviously they're perfect. I wonder if there was like a lot of pressure in Taylor's mind of like, everyone thought that that relationship was perfect and everyone was like, love's not gonna exist if they ever broke up. We obviously don't know everything about her life, like clearly, and we only know what she allows us to know. And I think the really cool thing about Taylor and Travis, first of all, TNT, that's just so cute. But what I think is so cool is that they seem to be allowing us to know more. And it's one of those things where their relationship doesn't need to be completely isolated from the world for people to know that like they're in a good place. Like they don't have to not ever talk about each other. They don't have to ever avoid doing red carpets together. Like Travis can mention her on his podcast because literally everyone knows that they're dating and that they're together. Like it just makes logical sense. But like I think because Travis isn't weird about like talking about dating Taylor Swift, everyone is more cool with the fact of like, yeah, obviously you don't need to disclose personal information, like you guys are in a private relationship, but like we just love hearing him gush about her. And like, why would she not love that? Like obviously she loves it. I love, it's so cute. Anyway, so now we are waiting for the Tortured Poets department, and I don't think I've ever been more excited for an album in my entire life. I've already decided that Tortured Poets department is going to be my favorite album, and I don't think anything can change my mind. It's going to be so good. I think I need a box of tissues because I'm gonna cry. If you want me to record my reaction, let me know. I mean, I'm planning on doing it anyway because I've always wanted to record a live reaction to a Taylor Swift album for my own personal archives. If you are interested in that, let me know. because I'm very, very excited at the thought of having a genuine reaction caught on camera, because usually I'm just sitting in the dark listening to Taylor's albums at like 9 o'clock because that's when they release on the West Coast. Oh my god, I cannot believe I'm going to be hearing her voice with new words in like 3 weeks. Oh, this is so random. So there was actually on Spotify, there was a song from some random person that I guess is like a weird connection to Taylor Swift, like people were saying, but it said Tortured Poets Department, and it was actually released on Spotify, and it sounded like it was an AI generation, but everyone was like, that's not Taylor. Like, obviously this is, I don't know what it is, but like, why is it on Spotify? It was very weird. Anyway, this reminded me of something. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie Argylle, but there was something going around online for a very long time saying that Taylor Swift was going to be in the movie Argylle because it was about a writer who was working on a novel series, and she was very close with her mom, and her mom was giving her like advice about her book, and she had a backpack with a cat in it, and like it was this weird like spy film where like the girl was writing, but then like the movie was the book that she was writing, but then you would get pulled out of the book back into the movie. It was a little, it was not confusing, I'm just explaining it bad. Everyone had a list of reasons of why Taylor Swift either wrote this movie or was starring in this movie or had something to do with this movie. I was so convinced that I went to the movies and I was like, we have to watch this movie because Taylor Swift wrote it and she's in it. And like, I was so convinced. This is like a 3-hour movie, and we're sitting there watching it. I'm like, okay, it's good. It's a little bit of a slow start, but we're getting somewhere. And then like we get like halfway through to the point where I'm like, Taylor should really be in this movie by now. And then we're getting to the point where I'm like, I don't know if Taylor's gonna be in this movie. It was hilarious because there came a turning point where Matt and I were both like, this movie's kind of bad. And our different reaction was so funny because Matt is not like a Swiftie. He's very kind and generous in that he will listen to me rant about her for a very long time. And he is definitely not like one of those rude haters that like scoffs at her. He listens to some songs, he likes some of them, but definitely nothing crazy. Like, he's not gonna be like, she's a god and everything she does is perfect. So we're like, you know, the movie ends, the credits roll, and we're like, oh, what did you think of the movie? I was like, yeah, about halfway through, I was like, this movie's kind of bad, so there's no way Taylor wrote it. And Matt starts laughing because he's like, oh, I thought the opposite. I thought this movie was kind of bad, so like maybe Taylor did write it, because it's like, that would make sense for her first movie that she ever did for it to not be great. And I was like, there's no way she would put out a movie that's not iconic and great and perfect. If I'm looking at this movie with my 2 eyes and am seeing that it's not great, there is no world where Taylor would look at that movie and be like, that's good, let's put that out there. And so I just knew, I'm like, there's no way she's in it, there's no way she had anything to do with this movie because it's not that good. And so I got to the point where I'm like, there's no way she can be in this, like please don't let her be in this because it's not very good. And Matt was like the complete opposite. He's just like, yeah, this movie was getting pretty bad, so I feel like having like a new writer who's never done movies before, that would make sense. And I was like, nope, Taylor could not have done this. Anyway, if Taylor actually did that movie, that would be very interesting. Anyway, we are now officially waiting for Tortured Poets, and this video is officially so long, but thank you so much for listening if you made it this far. I love you guys. I love Taylor Swift. I love that you are willing to listen to me talk about her for hours on end, and if you have any questions, please let me know. If you have gotten any sort of clarity about what you want me to go into more detail about on this channel, let me know. I'm still torn about where to start. Anyway, I will see you guys in my next video. I love you so much. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have any video recommendations for the future, leave them in the comments down below. Bye guys!
Speed to the city streets, we began to feel the fire. We rise like tall buildings as the chemicals, they take us higher.